Anna's just popped to the toilet.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll introduce you. It's like you can leave. Yeah. People always like to worry. Okay, everyone. Thank you all for coming. We'll make a start. So thanks to Natasha and Anna for coming in today. So today we're going to cover.
Sorry, she's in the way. I don't know.
Oh no, you're all right. You're going to cover all things sort of integrity and ethics and stuff that's really important for projects and obviously the future policy changes which are going to come into force in the next few years. So today we're joined by Natasha Awais-Dean, who's the Research Integrity Manager, and Anna, what was your last name? Whyton, yes. I can't remember whether it's Whyton or Whyton. It's Whyton. Who's the Research Governance Coordinator. And yes, so I mean the floor is yours. I won't say any more to you because you have a lot to get through, I guess, and you need to slow off. So yes, well, thank you very much for coming. And the recorder is on. Yeah. Yeah. Okay then.
Perfect. Right. Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you for having us. It's great also to see the initiative, I think, of RIOT Science Club, which I think is sort of a brilliant thing that, you know, we really want to champion more of sort of this sort of thing, actually. And actually, the UK Research Integrity Office CEO found out about this, about your RIOT, and is very interested, actually, in sort of, you know, touching base. So I said I'd put you in touch with him, because this kind of initiative is exactly the kind of thing that we want to see elsewhere in the college. And also, I'm going to start with an apology, which you should never ever do. We're not going to be covering ethics.
Oh, okay.
Because that's a whole other team. So we're mostly focusing, as you'll hear in a bit, on sort of mostly the integrity side and GDPR in research. Ethics can come another time, but our ethics team are always available to sort of be contacted if you do have any questions about ethics. So very quickly, just a brief introduction to our department. So we sit within the Department of Research Governance, Ethics and Integrity. We have recently appointed academic dean for our area, who is Professor Tim Newton. So he has gives us sort of good academic oversight of all three areas. We then are led by a director who covers all three areas, Maurice Lunny. And then we have the governance and ethics teams who are managed by Dan Butcher. And under him sit Anna and Charlotte, who are our two research governance coordinators. And on the ethics side of things, we have three senior ethics officers, Elsa, Laura and James, but all their details are on the website. So we kind of are now in this incarnation since January of this year. So I started on the integrity side, and as of about middle of August of this year, we also have a new research conduct officer to help support the integrity side, because obviously, as I hope you can appreciate, it's a very big area to be dealing with across the whole of the university. So we were formed to sort of look after those three areas, but we also talk to each other a lot, and I think that's really important, because actually these three areas do not sit in isolation. We have a lot of common shared interests. We sit within the wider Directorate of Research Management and Innovation, RMID, and so again we have close links with research grants and contracts, other areas of the college as well, other central teams. So Anna and Charlotte have a lot of engagement with library services, IT and compliance, and on the integrity side we're also working quite closely with HR and D&I with regards to our funder obligations regarding bullying and harassment. So we do sort of try to touch a lot of kind of areas of the college and try to have a really good overview. I always thought it'd be quite useful to hear a little bit about me, if I can be indulged for a moment or two, and my background as to how I came to be where I am. So I am a researcher by background. I actually started off in the museum sector, working in curatorial roles. So my research is very much from an arts humanities background, working very interdisciplinary, so across history, English, visual studies, material culture studies, and English as well. So I work with objects, is my thing, very much kind of the materiality of objects, and how they feed into a wider social and historical context within the Renaissance. So broadly speaking, sort of Henry VIII, 1509, to the death of James I in 1625. I then moved into project management of research grants, both here and at the Institute of Philosophy at Senate House. So I've kind of kept that engagement with research and researchers across a kind of a wide range of projects. And in particular, what sort of interests me and struck me is sort of, I guess, how research is done and how it's done well. And I do keep up my research profile. I lecture occasionally, and I still publish, so have sort of book chapters in the pipeline. So I'm trying to sort of keep relevant in my field. But alongside, what I really, really enjoy doing is actually supporting researchers and being there to support research and the research output of King's to make sure that it is of the highest quality research. So today I'm going to give a very quick brief overview of what is research integrity, talk about the Concordat to support research integrity, and sort of dip in slightly to the wider research integrity landscape. Research misconduct, which is the sort of the flip side and the not so nice stuff of what we do. And then we're going to be looking at some case studies. So I'm going to require your collaboration and input and shouting out. So please feel free, because actually it's a good way to sort of get you thinking, I think, really about good research conduct. And then I'll be handing over to Anna to talk about GDPR. So I've got this image up here, and I really, really like this image as an example. The one thing that is slightly missing from this is governance, because actually we need governance, integrity and ethics in research. And it really sums up, I think, quite nicely, you know, when we talk about integrity and ethics and governance, these aren't just a nice add-on that get put at the end of your research, something you have to think about just to say, I need to tick this box and I need to just do something to demonstrate that I have integrity. It needs to be fundamental right from the start. It needs to be embedded in your research, it needs to be embedded in sort of the cultures within your teams, within your departments, within your faculties and within the university as a whole. So it's really about, you know, how these three key ingredients actually form a part of you as a researcher. So I want you just kind of always think back to this image and just think about actually integrity, governance and ethics are so integral to who you are and how you conduct yourselves in research. But what do we actually mean by research integrity? So it's fundamental to all areas of research, across all disciplinary areas, and all levels of researchers. And I think the best way to think about integrity is about excellence. We want to support you to be the best researchers that you can be, to be able to, you know, really go out to the academic community, to your peers, to your funding bodies, but also to the public who ultimately fund your research, and know that all those people and those areas of the world can have trust in the research that you produce and create and are disseminating. Because ultimately, without that public trust or the trust of your peers, essentially, without wanting to sound too cruel and callous, it's redundant. Because if people don't trust the research that you're producing, then what value does it have in society? So we want to make sure that there is the confidence that the findings and results from your research are reliable and trustworthy. And ultimately, any research you do under the King's umbrella is about our reputation. So we also want to protect our reputation. And you must be, you know, without wanting to sound too scary, but, you know, that is quite a big sort of big shoes to fill, really. But actually, you should be proud of that, that actually, you know, we are, King's is only the sum of its parts, and those parts are you and the research that you're producing. So when we think about excellence in research, we're asking for honesty. But again, and this is kind of encapsulates sort of all aspects of the research. So in the way that you present your research goals, how you report your research methodology, in the gathering of the data, how you acknowledge people in the course of your research appropriately, and how you communicate sound research findings to others. But also we're looking for rigour. So the adherence to all your disciplinary standards and norms. So you need to be aware of any disciplinary standards that are in place, any ethical or legal guidance as well. And there is an onus as well. The research themselves must take responsibility. And as well, it's our responsibility as an institution to make sure that you are aware of what you need to be doing. You should be using appropriate research methods. You should be adhering to any agreed protocols for the research that you're conducting. How you interpret your results as well, you need to be rigorous in that approach. And again, in how you communicate. So in any publication, in any conference papers, in any impact case studies as well. If you're doing, if you're engaging with the public as well, we need to be thinking about that. And then it's about transparency and open communication. So thinking about competing interests. Again, how you report your data collection methods, how you're analysing and interpreting your data. And I know this probably sits in quite well with you, but thinking about, so this really fits in with sort of the open science sort of framework, and this idea about being very transparent in the sharing of results, but also in sharing of negative results as well, I think is very important to be considering. And again, transparency in how you're presenting the work to other researchers and to the public. And then finally, we think about care and respect for all participants that are subject to your research, or the users and also the beneficiaries of your research. So again, that kicks into the public idea. And also it's about having integrity for the research record that you leave behind, because that is where future generations of researchers will come to build upon their research. So you need to know that actually you have done the utmost to make sure that the research you're producing sort of really does adhere to these criteria. As I mentioned, I'm aware that your sort of area is open science, open data as well. Is that included in that sort of, that whole sort of, which is one aspect of kind of under the wider area of research integrity. But as I mentioned, it covers the whole research endeavour. And what you really do need to be thinking about, and I hope that kind of came across, is that it's the entire life cycle of a project. So it is from the conception of the idea, how you're going to think about managing the project and the research, through to actually carrying it out and beyond into publication and dissemination, and then again ensuring that the research record you leave behind is there and is trustworthy for future generations to build on. So these are just a few kind of areas that we can think about when we think about research integrity. So declaration of interests. This is an obvious one, but if you are being funded by a big tobacco company, that needs to be declared at the outset of your research, because there is a clear conflict potentially, depending on how you conduct research. But again, if we're just transparent about any interests that we might have that could be competing with the research project that you're undertaking, that needs to be made clear. There is currently no policy conflict of interest, is that our sort of understanding, but it's been referred to sort of top college level now to deal with producing a conflicts of interest statement or policy to help with that, because I don't think there's enough guidance as such as sort of how to declare that. I put research collaborations. So a lot of the time we see where the conversations haven't happened at the start, and then there are issues that arise much later down the research sort of the life cycle, in terms of, it could be at publication stage, so in terms of authorship, there could be disputes, but actually if you iron all of those out at the start of any research collaboration, so have that real honest conversation about, okay, well, who's doing which bit of the research, who, if we author a paper on this subject, who is going to be named, as the senior author. So it's really important to set out those parameters at the start of a research project, because a lot of issues could be ironed out just by taking that really simple step. Data management and data storage fall kind of a lot sort of within the governance team, but again, this is all good practice, and you should be thinking about how you are managing that data, and whether the data, and I know Anna's going to be talking about it in a bit, but sort of about whether it's sort of anonymous or not, and how you're managing it and how you're then storing it. So I've obviously put open science, open research, and sort of issues of data sharing again. Reproducibility, again, I think is an area that you're interested in. Again, so I'm preaching to the converted, but you understand that this is all about, this fits in with the idea about transparency as well. Actually, if people are sharing their data, then it should make it very easy for it to be reproducible. So it's all these things sort of tie in together. Issues again about publication, which ties in again with sort of authorship, but just in thinking about sort of appropriate referencing, and whether that's acknowledgement as well of funders, to make sure that we're very careful in sort of every part of the research process. And I've added at the bottom supporting of junior researchers. So this is something that's actually sort of now coming in very recently with the Hong Kong Manifesto, which was drafted by the organisers of the 6th World Conference on Research Integrity earlier this year. And it's really thinking about changing the metrics when we are assessing researchers in the promotions process in institutions. And what they want to do is move away from publication metrics and funding metrics to basically look at promotions for researchers and really think about sort of other things that could be seen as being part of a good researcher. So really encouraging blue sky thinking, but also the support of junior researchers was something that was there. Actually, if somebody is demonstrating good mentorship and that they have a very collegiate or promote a collegiate environment where people are free to discuss ideas, that junior researchers feel just as valued as more senior researchers, this is all contributing to a very healthy culture, which is what we really ultimately want to really see and encourage. So I mentioned the Concordat to support research integrity. So I know that there is also the Concordat to support the career development of researchers, which I believe came out last month, I think it was, just a couple of weeks ago. So this is another Concordat, which is produced by Universities UK in collaboration with a number of signatories, including sort of the main funders, so UKRI, Welcome, also HEFCE, the Welsh Funding Council, Scottish Funding Council, the NIHR, and as I said, we sign up through it through Universities UK, who are sort of responsible for drafting it. There are 5 high-level commitments, which I'll go on to in a minute. The Concordat was first published in 2012, and as signatories, we do sign up to it. And there are a lot of expectations on institutions. But there was a report last July 2018, by the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, and they were looking really at the state of play of research integrity within institutions. And the take-home message was that it wasn't really good enough. Institutions were not doing enough to, one, they didn't have rigorous processes when things do go wrong in terms of misconduct, but also in terms of visibility of research integrity, it just wasn't high enough within institutions. So they recommended that this needed revising. So the new Concordat is supposed to be out this month, at which point, we will then disseminate through our sort of channels into faculties, so hopefully sort of notification of that will get passed around to everybody. The main changes, so these are the 5 high-level commitments, and these were in the 2012 version, and actually they remain exactly the same for 2019. A lot of the bigger changes, so the Concordat applies to all institutions, research institutions, or actually I should say employers of researchers. It applies to funding bodies, and it applies to the researchers themselves. And there are lots of expectations on all 3 kind of groups of people. The biggest changes have been from the 2012 version, where the language was very much about, we would like to see, you should be doing this. It's very much shifted to, you must be doing this. So, I mean, one of the biggest things for us was about the mandating training for any research active member of staff. We've been told that that's going to be toned down slightly, but that's more from a procedural point of view, that they realise if they mandate it and only give us a 12-month period in which to implement it, the majority of institutions will fail there, because, you cannot enforce every single research member of active member of staff to undergo training within such a short time frame that's going to be meaningful. But essentially they would like to see that. So that's sort of the line that we're going down, that every member of staff who is engaged in research must undertake research integrity training. But again, the expectations and the onus is a lot on the researchers to make sure that you are fulfilling your obligations, to adhere to your sort of professional frameworks, legal and ethical frameworks as well. So again, as you can see, the language is about the high standards of rigour and integrity in all aspects of research, conducted in line with your professional frameworks. Number 3 is really about us, so that's about us supporting a research environment, but that's also about you, the researchers. If you're a senior researcher, how do you foster a really good research environment and culture within your kind of immediate sphere? And that sort of fits in as well, number 3, with our support of researchers as well, and the training that we can offer you. Number 4 is about the research misconduct procedure, which I'll talk through in a bit, and then how we work together as well. So that's more the institutions coming together under the umbrella, sort of supported by Universities UK as well. Are there any questions so far about any of this, or do you want to wait till the end for questions? The end?
I have one.
Go on.
We were at the, when this was sort of
So I think the biggest thing for us is funders come more into this a lot more in terms of their expectations, and speaking to funders, we know, and the problem is they need a more coordinated approach, because at the moment all the funding bodies have very different requirements about what we need to be doing. They are going to come down, I think, a lot harder. And where in the past they've been using the carrot more than the stick, because they don't want to see anything, they don't want to be taking funding away from institutions, for example, or from individuals. I think they may use a few people as examples to say, actually, we are going to take action, but I think we are getting the impression that they want to see that we are doing something. And they're coming down again on the side of bullying and harassment as well, which is why we're sort of coordinating with HR about this. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing, the pressure from the funders, and that's an important thing to note, because actually, at the worst end of the spectrum would be that, the absolute worst case scenario would be for an institution to be blacklisted, say, for 3 years with a funder, and that would have a massive impact, on King's. Obviously, there are degrees to that, but I think it is going to be whatever the funders do is going to really kind of push us, and maybe that's what we need to be able to say, actually, this is you will not be able to apply for funding if we do not meet these requirements. So, yes.
What are you going to do about professorial bad apples? Because most professors here are incredibly supportive and good leaders, but there's one or two who bully and coerce and sort of try to engineer research that doesn't disprove their sacred finding 20 years ago. How do you deal with that?
So we depend a lot on you coming forward, and you can come and talk to us in confidence, and I think that's the important thing, to say that if you do have concerns, come to us, because actually we need to stamp that out, because we don't want we are aware that the majority of people want to do the right thing and do the right thing most of the time, and that it is a few. In fact, I draft in my notes bad apples as well, because I acknowledge that does happen, and it's rare, but they do exist, because we don't know about them. So we rely heavily on sort of our connections with the faculties to be able to sort of have a talk to us and really work it out, because if we don't know about something, we can't investigate ultimately. And at the moment we're talking about trying to maintain confidentiality the best we can, but working with HR, so HR would have an obligation to report I think it's proven upheld allegations of bullying and harassment to the funders. They don't want to take that responsibility for talking to funders. So we've agreed that we will be that line of communication. But it then means that we're having to have a lot of information. But actually, we thought if we have a central record that is just held within our team, so very few people can see it, and we're sort of, people where actually we notice there's a lot of allegations of bullying against a person, but they're never upheld for whatever reason, and actually that person might have a few issues that are about, research misconduct. If there's a pattern, then we would then, although nothing's ever been upheld, we would then start seeing, actually, this person seems to be causing a lot of red flags, there's got to be a reason for it, at which point we would probably then go and talk to sort of Dean of Faculty and say, okay, we need to deal with this, because there's clearly an issue going on. So we are trying to put measures in place.
Yeah, I think the model is the Tanya Singer scandal in
I don't know.
Google
Okay.
Tanya Singer, and
Okay.
she was a professor in Germany.
Okay.
This sort of thing, and
Okay.
they suspended her.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, but we've got to know about it. We have to know about it ultimately. So really, where can we help you? So we are the Research Integrity Office, and so this is our new tagline we're hoping to use on our sort of promotional information, that we are committed to excellence in research and the promotion of good conduct in research among the university's research community through the development of policies and procedures and the provision of training, support and guidance. And I've just noticed a typo, that we also work closely with governance and ethics. But ultimately, we are the first port of call. If you've got any queries, come to us. We liaise very closely with the UK Research Integrity Office. So if there was something that we hadn't come across before, in confidence, we would have a conversation, over the phone to sort of say, look, we've got this issue, we're not sure what to deal with. Can you advise? Because they may have seen it before. We own some policies. At the moment, King's doesn't have a code for good conduct, but we are developing that. So at the moment, we just signpost UK RIOT code, which isn't really good enough. We need something King specific, so that's what we're working towards developing. And we're also going to be looking towards developing guidance on certain topics, such as authorship, so that if people have got queries, they could, go online and find out something very, very quickly. But the biggest sort of thing that we're trying to do is develop training. So, as I mentioned, it's going to hopefully be mandatory training. So we are putting in from January to June or July, I think it is, next year, some training available on SkillsForge about research integrity. So this would be a sort of a very brief overview, so sort of more kind of what we're doing today about research integrity, so that people have some sort of idea of what it is and where to go. So they will be available. We're then looking to develop an online module, which would be a little bit more, and this would be the kind of the mandatory training that people take. We're hoping to roll this out to PGRs as well and make it a mandatory requirement of upgrade. So you cannot upgrade until you've taken this course. So that's one way to sort of get a very kind of large tranche of our population. And then we're going to be creating some bite-sized videos, which would be sort of 3 to 5 minute long, online, looking at various areas. So these are just a few sort of ideas for training videos that we've thought about, but we are welcome to take suggestions from you, because this is sort of things that we've come up with that we know we encounter on a regular basis, but yeah, we would really appreciate if you've got ideas for training for the videos. And then we will always run ad hoc training as well to smaller research groups if there's something really specific that you need training on. You know, we've seen sort of areas in the college where actually it'd be really useful to have training on appropriate image manipulation and things like that. So actually, if you've got ideas to go into your group, your division, your school, then just come to us and let us know. So I mentioned research misconduct, which is sort of the flip side to doing the right thing. We're actually looking to change the language slightly, so it's not about misconduct, but it's about breaches of good conduct, and sort of having a nice continuum, because we really recognise that, you know, I think the term misconduct seems quite a definitive term, and I think crucially, misconduct is about an intent to deceive. But what we're seeing a lot of the time is sort of bad practice, which is sort of goes against good research conduct. And as I mentioned to you previously, we know that the majority of researchers, the majority of the time, want to do the right thing. But it is unfortunately a fact of life that, one, mistakes can be made through genuine error, and that is okay to hold your hand up and say that happened. And that, two, also there are bad apples out there, and we want to sort of be able to identify that. So the majority of the issues we deal with are mostly about poor research practice, but we also want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to mitigate the risk to have a really big scandal. There's been a few cases recently in the press. There was a UCL case from, I think, 2014 that was recently published after a Freedom of Information request, and the Guardian forced the report to be published, and that was made public, I think, about 2 months ago. There's another case I've just seen, Cambridge. They've just published their report on their website, one of the colleges there. So, you know, we don't want to get to that stage. So we'd rather people come to us about it. So, what sort of things are we talking about? So this is currently the definition of research misconduct that is on our procedure. So we have fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, the misrepresentation of data and or interest and or involvement, and then the failure to follow accepted procedures or to exercise due care in carrying out responsibilities to avoid unreasonable risk or harm to humans, animals in research and the environment, or then what we do with the data of individuals that we collect during our research. Although this is the definition we currently use, it isn't exhaustive. And we will try to look at, you know, if someone had a concern that didn't fall under this, so things like gift authorship, for example, would be an issue that we would look at. Trying to think what else, but you know, there is a whole range. Misuse of research funds, for example, is clearly something that would be investigated under this and may go straight to sort of disciplinary processes. But as I said before, it has to be intentional. There has to be an intent to deceive, or it has to be seen as being reckless for misconduct to have occurred, which is why in the change to thinking about breaches, we can really look at kind of poor practice when it happens. We don't need to use the term misconduct, but can acknowledge that through error, and if it is sort of honest error, that a breach has happened. So it could be an image was incorrectly, I don't know, labelled, or has been misrepresented in some way without the use of a key, you know, and that sort of thing, where actually it's just a mistake, but a mistake has been made, it needs to be rectified, you know, whether that's a correction being written to the journal involved. But other things that, you know, kind of fall under some of these are cherry picking data. So if something falls outside of what your expected results were and you just sort of drop them off because you think I don't need that and it doesn't sort of fit my hypothesis, then that would be that's wrong. Salami slicing as well, so where you sort of take data and results from research and sort of basically divide it up to get multiple publications where really you should have only had the one. And as I mentioned as well, sort of image manipulation, inappropriate image manipulation is another thing that we've seen, so we are aware that it's something that we might need more training in. So our procedure, it's the procedure for investigating and resolving allegations of research misconduct. When we start an investigation, we go on the basis of the presumption of innocence. So, and the college makes no judgment at all when an allegation comes in. We don't take sides of either party. An allegation can come in from a member external to the college, or it can be reported internally. We always ask for conversations to be had locally first, because we want to just make sure that if there are any issues that perhaps, sometimes we find there are underlying issues between the people involved, and actually they just need to be dealt with by line managers or heads of departments. If it's not appropriate to do so, for example, if the complaint is about head of department, then obviously come to us either for advice or to sort of go down the formal route. And this applies to all research carried out in the King's name. So if you do some research here now and you move on to another institution, and then it's later found out that, say, you plagiarised, we would run the investigation if the research was carried out while you were at King's. Likewise, if somebody is here now and we find out that something they did elsewhere, we would refer it on to the other institution. So we have a sort of cross-institutional agreement with other institutions that this is sort of how we will manage investigations. The allegations have to be made in writing. Yes, sorry.
So I was just going to ask, you mentioned about talking to your office confidentially.
Yes.
Is there any scope within this for the complaints to be confidential in the allegations?
So at the moment, no. So we've now developed a new pro forma, which will go on the website shortly. We're just trying to do a sort of a new sort of version of our website to make it clearer. There is the option to keep it confidential. The procedure does allow that if you wish to remain anonymous, then the responsible officer, who is the Dean, Tim Newton, has the option to not take it forward. Because what we don't want is sort of lots of anonymous complaints coming in and we've got no sort of recourse to it. So it depends on the severity of the case. If it was something that seemed very minor and it seemed that actually it was quite malicious in its intent, a judgment call would have to be made. So, you know, but if you wished it to be anonymous from the person you're making the complaint about and indicate that to us, we can do that, but you also then would need to be aware that depending on the nature of the allegation, the person, when they get the summary of the allegations, and although we take names out, they would presumably know who has made the complaint. So although we know, and in all the communication that goes around an investigation, I never, as far as I can think of, write the names of the people in emails. It's all, you know, we refer to the initiator, who's the person that makes the complaint, and the respondent. So the names appear very rarely in the correspondence. It might be in sort of the first one when we're appointing panel members to say, okay, now we have to tell you sort of who it's about. And now we're also looking to sort of ways that we can make communications much more secure in terms of how we're sending information out. I mean, it's all sort of done confidentially and securely, but just to really make sure we're mitigating any risks of information coming out. So yes, the new pro forma will be out hopefully soon, which should be able to capture all the data we need. And then we go through sort of various processes. There's a preliminary screening by our office. Then we have an initial investigation panel to determine whether there is a case of research misconduct. If there is, it goes to a formal investigation with a panel which includes an external member to the college. And the investigations are run with people from the faculty, because we need a subject expert, but they are independent from the faculty and department. So we do want to make sure it's a very fair and transparent process. I'm going to skip case studies for the minute. I'm going to let Anna go, just because I know we're running out on time, so we'll come back to this, I think. So say that again, sorry. Yeah, so I mean, our procedure does state very clearly that nobody should sort of suffer detriment if they've made an allegation, and it shouldn't be held against them, even if the allegation is not upheld. So if somebody made an allegation and they then said to us, actually we've noticed that it has had recriminations within the department or faculty, we would go and deal with that on their behalf and speak to sort of the appropriate people, because that should not be happening. And that's why we sort of time with bullying and harassment, because we know that that can sort of then be sort of a factor that is affected. So we are there to support you in that as well, to make sure, because we don't want people to be afraid to come forward, as I realise that's an issue. Just sort of extra support for researchers in terms of faculty. We're looking to embed faculty research integrity champions, who would be the Vice Dean for Research or similar. And then we're looking for research integrity advisors across a range of career levels, people that would be the first port of call if you didn't want to come to us for fear of that we might trigger an investigation if we know too much, which we wouldn't. But just sort of a friendly face within your area, I think, is what we're looking for. So job descriptions are currently out for review. So I'm sure at some point you would be notified if people are interested in applying to be a research integrity advisor. You would get training support from us, and we would hope that you'd contribute to training of your fellow researchers. Contact details at the end, and I'm going to leave it to Anna for research governance. And if we have time, I can leave the case studies, or I can then just send them to Sam to circulate that.
There you go. So hi, my name's Anna Whyton. I'm a research governance coordinator. Natasha did a really good overview of our area, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Just to say, in our office there's 2 governance coordinators. We have a different focus. So my focus is arts and sciences, and my colleague Charlotte's is the health-based faculties. But to be totally honest, we cross over a lot, and we only kind of really stick to what our area is when there's something one of us doesn't want to do and wants the other one to do. So I do kind of understand the kind of research you've done. So my background is actually in research ethics, and Charlotte's is in clinical trials. So we do really understand the kind of practical implications of the research you're doing. We understand the kind of issues that you focus on kind of before, during and after. So we're quite familiar with kind of the things you'll encounter. So we're quite a new team. We came into fruition at the end of last year in response to everyone's favourite piece of legislation, which is the GDPR. So when we came into post, there's a lot of really good information out at the college about what the GDPR is, but a lot of it wasn't focused at researchers, so it sort of really didn't explain what kind of processing activities researchers would be doing, and it wasn't kind of put in the language that you guys would understand and you would engage with. So that's the main thing we've really tried to do this year, is to put data processing in terms of collecting personal data from human participants. So that's what we do. I think probably something important we do as well is a lot of myth busting. We get a lot of very anxious phone calls from people being like, the GDPR has said I have to delete everything ever. And a lot of the time that's not really true. So if you do have any questions, or you're not quite sure if the GDPR and the Data Protection Act applies to the kind of research you're doing or kind of data you're holding, reach out to us. We're really happy to discuss it with you. I'm going to give an overview of some of the areas that probably will be relevant to you, but ultimately the GDPR can be a little bit tricky because it really applies. You have to kind of consider the context of the research you're doing and the data you're collecting and how it's being stored and what you're working with. So if you're ever in doubt, we'd much rather you come and talk to us, and we can help you kind of work things out. So these are sort of the areas that we cover with the GDPR. We run KDPR, which is the King's Data Protection Register. So part of our obligations under GDPR is that we need to keep a register of all the data processing activities with personal data that have been done for research. It sounds a lot more onerous than it is. It's a really, really kind of quick form that we just want to know the who, the what, the where, the why and how of why you're collecting data. I know this is going to sound like something I would say in my role, but I actually think it's a really good tool at the beginning of your data collection activities, because it sort of encourages you to think about where you're going to keep your data and how long for. It sort of gets you to engage with those issues right off the bat, rather than leaving them till you've collected all the data and then you think, oh, actually, what am I going to do with it now? How long am I going to store it for? So it kind of encourages you to think about your project, again, as Natasha said, as a life cycle rather than in kind of disparate stages. We also advise on areas such as data sharing agreements, data transfer agreements, which are things you may need if you're sharing data with other institutions, or potentially even within King's, because King's is quite a large institution. So if you're sharing data with King's Health Partners, again, it's probably best for you to work out what your obligations are, or even if they apply to you, rather than just going ahead and finding out later that you haven't done certain bits. I think the best thing I could say about the GDPR is a lot of it is common sense, and is a lot of stuff that good researchers do anyway. So I think probably what you'll find is most of these things are stuff you're doing anyway, so it probably isn't as intimidating as it sounds. So yes, just briefly just about the King's Data Protection Register. As I touched on before, one thing to note is that they should be registered with us after ethical clearance is in place, and that applies to if you're getting ethical clearance through King's or through the HRA, so it's something we want to know about after, just in case the ethical clearance process asks you to change anything about what kind of data you're collecting and where you're collecting it. Yeah, it is really simple. If you've used our ethics form, the King's one, it is identical, which is kind of a blessing and a curse because we get some confusion. But if you can use Remus, you'll flow through the system really easily. So one of the key things we advise on in relation to GDPR is what is personal data. So personal data includes information that relates to natural persons who can be identified or are identifiable. So we do this in kind of two different ways. So we consider information that we can directly identify an individual from. So something like you've collected a data set which maybe has someone's full name, their address, their date of birth. If you were to look at that data, you could instantly pick out who, you know, that person is and who they are. You've identified them. So that makes them identifiable. And I've said that about 10 times, but you know, we're hammering it home, people. But we also have to consider indirectly identifying people in combination with other information that's kind of in the public domain. And I think this is where GDPR is sort of really representative of kind of the age of the internet. It's legislation that represents, you know, that a lot of us put a lot of personal information online for anyone to find. I think, you know, there's probably never been a time in history where you could find out more about someone so quickly through a Google search. So you might have collected a set of information that you don't feel has any information that could identify an individual from. But for example, say all the information you had was someone's job title and their gender. Potentially that's completely anonymous. It's not something that could identify someone. But in certain situations and in certain contexts, perhaps it could. So if the data you collected had things like administrator and their gender, that's probably not going to identify one specific person. But if the context of your research focuses on a really niche field where someone's job title is something particularly fancy and jazzy that no one else is likely to have, and you have their gender and potentially that the field is very dominated by one gender than the other, one specific gender, if you put that information into LinkedIn or into Facebook, or perhaps you were aware of the sector, only so many universities work in this kind of information, you could potentially have this data and combine it with information that's in the public domain and potentially identify someone. So that's something that we're really getting you to consider is, while the data you're holding might not identify someone, you need to think about it on a much larger scale. And I think that's probably where it feeds in with kind of open science and open data, is if you're promising your participants an I can never say that word quickly, anonymity, can you really provide that? You have to think about the bigger context of where the data is going and how it's being presented and where it's going to be published. So these are some examples of what personal data is. So on the left here we've got name, date of birth, gender, contact details, identification numbers. Online identifiers, it's quite an interesting one, which again came in with GDPR, so things like a Twitter handle or a website or your email address is probably unique to you and potentially could identify you. On the other side, we've got special category data. So any of you that were familiar with the previous Data Protection Act, that was personally sensitive data. What this type of data is we're not saying you can't collect it, which I think is a big misconception. It's saying that these types of data are more sensitive and you should protect them as such. So if you're working with people's, health data combined with their political opinions, these can be really sensitive bits of information about people that if they were kind of leaked or breached or given into the wrong hands, it could have really serious impacts on individuals' lives. It could, could lead to loss of freedoms in some cases, and could be, data that's really personal to them is in a domain that they didn't want it to be in. So all we're asking you to do is to think carefully when you're using that kind of data. Have you got the right provisions in place to keep it protected? So quickly to touch on anonymous data. So the GDPR actually doesn't apply to data that's truly anonymous, but the threshold for anonymity is quite high. So you'd have to consider what we talked about before about, yes, you think it's anonymous in the setting you have it, but if you combined it with other information in the public domain, could it be identifiable? So that's something to consider. True anonymisation is also an irreversible act. So if you're keeping data in a certain format and you've stripped it of all the personal data that's contained in that data set, but you've put the key to that person 1 is this person and person 2 is that person, if that data set still exists somewhere else, that data isn't really anonymous because you can combine those back together and re-identify someone. So for it to be truly anonymous, that personal data has to be completely destroyed and there's no way you could put them back together. This is all going to be completely contextual within the confines of your individual research. So again, if you're not sure or you want a second opinion or you just want to kind of flesh out some of the issues that you're encountering, like, please come and talk to us, and we're really happy to sort of maybe give you some thinking points. We've also got some really good resources on our website about kind of the issues you should be encountering, some kind of examples of the issues you might want to think about. So yeah, so this is really just a quick overview of the areas I've touched on. So how does the GDPR affect research? Generally not as much as people think. So you want to consider the key principles of GDPR, and I haven't gone into them now because there's quite a few of them, but we have some on our website. Yeah, a lot of it, again, like I said, is just common sense. Consider how governance plays a role in your research. So King's Data Protection Register is the one I've mentioned there. And data management and storage. So considering, are you going to be sharing your data? Where's it going to stay long term? Are you keeping it at King's? Are you keeping it somewhere else? Where are you supposed to keep your data is probably one you should really engage with. Is it being secured, secured store. I always get them too confused. So yeah, so it's just thinking about the long-term implications of the research you're doing. So yeah, GDPR is the main area that we support researchers, but we actually engage with a lot of other areas. So as Natasha said, we work really closely with our colleagues in integrity and ethics. What we're trying to do is link up as many different areas within the college as we can. I know for new starters it can be really daunting if you're doing a research project and you just don't really know where to start. You might have got one information from one place, different information from another place, and you don't really know where to begin. Or perhaps you've even got slightly further down the line and you don't really know where to go next. So we'd always encourage you to come and have a chat with us. We can kind of signpost you and give you some advice. So yeah, in areas such as data management, registration of research on public databases, data sharing agreements, data protection impact assessment, risk assessment, things like that, all the kind of other governance considerations outside of GDPR. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we're based at Waterloo. If you ever want to come and have a chat, feel free to pop over or give us a call, drop us an email. We really think that all the research that is being planned and is being undertaken is fantastic, and our place here is not to hinder anything that's being done, is just ultimately support you. We all think everything that's going on is excellent and we want to be a part of that. We want to make it as good as we can. So yeah, if you really don't know where to go next, please engage with us, and I think probably we'd be able to help in ways maybe you don't know we can. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Are you going back to your case study?
I don't think we've got time for case studies.
Okay.
I'd like to, but I can send them through.
Yeah, that'd be really
I
good.
mean, they're just a few kind of get you thinking about what we might, kind of things that might go through your mind. So like one, which I'm just touching quickly, is about publishing the same article that you've written but in a foreign language journal. Do you just translate it and just submit it? And sort of what is the process? And this actually came up in Hong Kong because, and actually no one could agree on it at all, which was really interesting. But what people's thoughts are.
You cite it, it's all right.
And I think that's, yeah.
It says at the top, this is a translation of an article appearing.
I think there seems to be a lot of people, especially colleagues that publish in Chinese and English, saying, oh, that's fine, or even French and English. There were so many people that just, I think when they publish in foreign language, and then they come back to English, just think, that's absolutely fine. And it's never occurred to them that might be an issue, but it is about just being sort of transparent with what we're doing.
But it's not that that the journals, the editors usually check whether the data. You have to declare that the data has not been published elsewhere, and that is regardless of the language you're using.
No, and that's your responsibility as a researcher. And
But then if you're not declaring that, you are in breach of trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you should have said that it's already published, and then they cannot publish it in another language if they want, unless they copyright with the original article, which prevents you to do that as well.
there's been a quite profile cases recently of, it doesn't have to be in another language, just your own, people are just copying blocks of text and just having 3 or 4 papers just the same, just rewording certain paragraphs, but other paragraphs are verbatim.
Yeah. Well, self-plagiarism is something that I think people don't really think about, and it can be as innocent as you've done some work, say your MA or MSc, whatever it is, you go to the PhD thing, you just think, well, it's my work, because I can use it. Of course you can use it, and you're just citing it. I think that's just in doubt. I think just be as sort of rigorous as you can. I think that's the key message. And if in doubt about anything in research with it, come to any of our teams, because we talk closely, we will triage things among each other, and we have regular catch-ups where we have a few issues that cross over our 3 areas, so we're always talking. But yeah, if there's anything else, we can talk about that.
One thing that you've got now closed off.
Can you do something about the monetary incentives for researchers to suppress the success of their ideas in the intellectual property form?
Say that again?
Yeah, so there's in the intellectual property form, there's monetary incentives included that can put pressure on researchers to suppress the success of their ideas. Basically, because it's very really staggered. So you get 70% if you make less than 150,000, and then if you make more, you get 50%. So that means if you fall over the line, how much you get drops significantly, which is then again creating a monetary incentive there for people to suppress the success of their ideas if they think they fall into these categories. So it's a very line that goes like this instead of just being a smooth line.
I haven't seen the IP form. I will. Maybe some of what I feel like.
Yeah, I've already.
Interesting to see because.
I've sent it to Libby already, but then I'll forward that.
No, I think it would be interesting from us to see that aspect, because actually that is something. And if you think that's something that actually researchers are doing, because they're sort of.
Not saying that they're doing it, I'm saying that the form is creating monetary incentives to do it. Not saying that people are doing it.
One thing that bugs me, I have to say, is the one thing that I find that works is if you shame people into doing good practice. And so that's why people have sort of invented the open science badges, so you can actually show that you have an open data, or that you are pre-specifying your analysis, let's say, and you can flaunt that kind of stuff, or the absence of it in other papers or wherever makes people prefer to read papers where they are than where they aren't. And it would be great if you could do that in an institutional context where departments could sort of advertise their sort of how many papers that they have just uploaded to preprint servers. But what I would really like is, and that would be one way, or engineer a change, to get people to pre-specify their analysis plan. I know that's only specific to certain research areas, but a lot of the problems is in research, I think, is not these exceptional cases of bad apples, but the general attitude that bad practice actually standard practice. So the flexibility of analysing data and the lack of any penalty for doing so, and then just reporting all your successful hits. That is really just on a mass scale. I mean, it's a silent epidemic of this sort of misrepresenting your data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what we're aware of.
I know you're aware of it. It's just when I say to shame people into not doing that is one way to enforce, to guard against that from happening. So I wonder whether there is anything that the integrity office could do beyond education and training and so on to actually mandate that you can't do this, or you can't do it in the undisclosed way that people do it. So publishing, for example, results of analysis that appear confirmatory, whereas actually they're just exploratory.
So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we need to look into, because I think that, and you're right, that it is a sort of bad apple for big cases, they're not the issues. With the training, I think sort of having some sort of King's accredited sort of marker to show that you are, sort of almost have a badge one, like the open search with the we toyed again with having a sort of king thing to show that people's research is open, but again, it's very discipline specific that actually sways the university will be left out of that. And what we don't want to be seen is actually for arts departments where it's a very different sort of thing, it might be appropriate to have something like that, and actually, are we then penalising them? Well, and that's what we don't want to see to be doing, that actually we're favouring sort of perhaps more the health factors over arts and sciences in that regard. So we need to think of something that actually that does works on an institutional level across all our disciplines, and how we do that is sort of a challenge. And obviously acknowledging that in different areas there are things that might be more appropriate. But if we have to have sort of a Kings-wide, what that is, and so even through the integrity advisors, we're looking for people that sort of are known for sort of as we know the meeting, but for their good research, because we don't want anybody. We want people that can be held up and exemplars, good practice. So I guess even in the sort of in the holding of that role, people know that actually